on to introductions. I'm Janie. I'm the director of ECCR. I'm an accountant with a background in banking before moving over some 5.5 years ago into the charity sector, where I was the finance director for a charitable foundation before joining ECCR. I'm passionate about how we can look at our resources holistically, both as individuals and as the church, to shape a fairer and more just world.
And I'm Rosie. I'm based in Worcester and I manage the Money Makes Change programme at ECCR. I don't come from a finance background, but I have worked with churches and volunteers and campaigners in different settings in the past. And I'm learning a lot, and I'm really, really passionate about this work and helping more people have conversations about money, which is not always an easy thing to talk about.
Great. Thanks, Rosie. So what are we planning to cover tonight? So in this hour together, we're going to give you a brief introduction to ECCR and our Money Makes Change programme, as well as share why we believe there's never been a more urgent time to consider the entirety of our resources as a church and how we can use them to love our neighbours and care for God's creation. We'll look at ways individuals and churches can take practical actions to address their financial footprint, including how our resources can help with that. And finally, we'll look at other ways that you can be involved with our work and what we have coming up. We'll also be sure to leave lots of time for questions at the end. Please feel free to add your questions throughout the event into the chat box, and we'll come back to these at the end. And if we can answer them quickly during the event, we'll also endeavour to do so. So hopefully that's what you're expecting. So what is Money Makes Change and who are ECCR? Some of you may know about the work of ECCR, but for those of you who don't, a very brief introduction. ECCR stands for the Ecumenical Council for Corporate Responsibility. We were established about 30 years ago and have brought churches, faith groups, and religious orders together on campaigns and advocacy around how businesses behave in the world. Our vision is to see money used in a way that creates a fairer and more sustainable world. And we launched Money Makes Change in January 2020, bringing together our work with individual Christians and churches into one program. So I'm now going to show you a brief introductory video to the Money Makes Change program.
How does your faith guide your decisions about money? Is your money or your church's money helping create a fairer world? Money Makes Change is a program to help Christians explore and make ethical choices around money. We help people understand how the everyday decisions we make about money impact society and God's creation. We get you thinking and talking about spending, saving and investing, and inspire action to create a fairer world. Imagine the difference we could make if every Christian used a more ethical bank, invested their pension and savings in companies working to better our planet, and supported businesses that live out our values. Join us as together we seek justice, love kindness, and walk humbly in every area of our lives, including how we use money. Money Makes Change, connecting faith and finance for a fairer world.
Through the Money Makes Change program, we want to open up conversations, making it easy for Christians to really talk about these issues, to explore the connections between their faith and their finances. Our resources are designed to help you as individuals and also as a church explore how the choices we make around money can change the world for the better. Imagine a world where every Christian chose a more ethical bank, invested their pension and savings in companies working to better our planet, and supported businesses that live out our values. This is our vision at ECCR, and we believe it could transform the financial system and the world we live in. All of the resources making up the Money Makes Change program include 3 key elements: educational materials, ways to take action, and inspiring stories of others who've been on similar journeys. We've also recently created a Facebook group where we hope to grow this community, and we will circulate a link to this following the session. Since launching the program in January, we have released 5 resources, and Rosie will touch on some of these in the next part of the session. Before I pass over to Rosie, it's important that we note that the Money Makes Change program aims to help Christians explore ethical issues surrounding their finances. It does not, however, offer specific financial advice or recommend specific products, and so any reference later to products are by way of example only. That sort of advice can only be given by a qualified and independent financial advisor. So this is our disclaimer with words to this effect, which I'm going to just leave up on the screen for a minute for you to have a read through, and then we'll move on. So thanks for reading that, and now I'm going to pass over to Rosie.
Thanks, Janie. So we're going to think now about the money and resources that our churches steward, and in a moment I've got an exercise for you to do, so if you've got your pen and paper handy, that would be helpful. But firstly, I want us just to think briefly about how we understand and talk about money in the context of our faith, whether that's as individuals or within our churches. The money that's in our bank accounts and our budgets, who does that money belong to and what is its purpose? We could obviously have a whole session on this, but I want to reflect briefly on two principles that theologian Walter Brueggemann suggests can be drawn from Scripture. Firstly, that money and possessions belong to God and are held in trust by humans in community. And secondly, that money and possessions must be managed in the practice of justice, that is for the good of the entire community. So I wonder what our church finances look like if we put these principles at the heart of our planning and our decision making. And we can follow these two principles through Scripture, and there may be particular passages that spring to mind for you. And for me, that understanding of everything coming from God is expressed very simply and completely in Psalm 24. The earth is the Lord's and all that is in it. God abundantly, and yet as the prophets of every age have to point out to us, as Jeremiah does here, we often fail to steward those resources in the practice of justice for the good of all. Time and time again, and still to this day, wealth is accumulated in the hands of a few. Workers are exploited, unjust debt is created, and when things go wrong, the poorest in society bear the burden. And you may have seen signs of that in your communities and in the wider world during the pandemic in the recent months. It really has exacerbated some of the existing inequalities in our society. So how do we model and live out something different? Something that gives hope and enables all of God's creation to flourish? How do we steward our resources in the practice of justice for the good of all, including the earth? I think we're used to conversations about money being about generosity and charitable giving, about giving away a portion of our resources, and it's right that we have those conversations and continue to think about how we give generously. But can we go one step further than that? Can we ensure that all of our resources, all the ways in which we steward money, are directed towards loving our neighbours and caring for creation? And that's going to be about more than our giving or our tithing. So I'd like to invite you to think a bit now about your church's finances through the idea of a financial footprint. You're probably familiar with the idea of a carbon footprint, where we measure our impact through looking at carbon emissions. But have you ever thought about your wider financial footprint? What impact do our decisions around money have on the world? Does the way we use money mean we tread lightly on the earth? What imprints do our financial choices leave for future generations? Do we use our money to stand in solidarity with others? And there are lots of different ways of thinking about this. We're going to explore this idea of the financial footprints just through a simple exercise. So if you do have a pen and paper to hand, you might want to start by drawing a simple outline of a footprint. And it really doesn't need to be beautiful. You don't need to be an artist, and we won't ask you to share it with anyone. And then I want you to spend the next few minutes thinking about how your church uses money. Maybe you can think about your church's expenditure, and to write different categories on your footprint. Some examples might be your spending on electricity, buildings, food and drink, equipment, or your charitable giving. And each church is going to be very different. And if you know roughly the amounts you spend on each category in a year, then you could add that in too, but unless you're the church treasurer, you might find that a bit tricky to do. I'll give you a few minutes to do that, and I'm going to stop speaking while you do that, help concentrate. But we do have a few images to share which might prompt some thoughts. And I think Jane is going to put just a reminder of the task in the chat box as well. So we'll just give you a few moments to do this. Now, I know that might not have given you very much time, but it might be something that you want to revisit at a later date once we've talked through a few other things this evening. But hopefully that will be an exercise that might be helpful to share with others at your church. And as you look at your footprint and things maybe you've just been thinking about, you've jotted down, I wonder how much attention as a church you give to the ethics of each category, and how does that compare to the amounts of money you spend in each area. And there may be some areas where you feel more confident than others that you're using your money in a way that has a positive impact. So for this next bit of the session, we're going to be looking at some of the practical steps you can take to think a bit more about your financial footprint, using some of the work that's part of our Money Makes Change pledge, which I'll explain more about later. So let's take an example of an imaginary church. We'll call this St Luke's. I'm not sure if anyone represents a St Luke's here tonight, but it's an imaginary church, and we can pretend where, it doesn't matter where it is in the country, what it looks like. But what I'm interested in is how it uses its money and resources. So we're going to look at 3 different elements of its financial footprint. its spending decisions, its banking and its investments. And hopefully some of these things will resonate with your context too. So let's look at its spending to start with. So St Luke's has recently switched to a renewable energy provider because of their concerns over climate change, and that's part of their journey towards becoming an eco-church and reducing their carbon emissions. They are also a fair trade church. They have been for many years. All the tea, coffee and sugar that they buy has the fair trade mark, meaning that the farmers and producers were paid a fair wage. And these are obviously really positive steps to have made, and they say something about the church's care for creation and concern for fair pay and workers' rights. And perhaps these are steps that your church has taken too. Churches have played a huge part in the fair trade movement over the last couple of decades and have really shifted the general public spending habits so that more and more people seek out fair trade products. It's now a very normal thing, I think, to go to a church and be able to get a fair trade coffee. You may have written down a whole list of other things on your financial footprint that we could look at more closely in terms of impacts on people and planet, everything from food and drink to cleaning products, toilet rolls. I don't know what else is on your list, but there are lots of ethical options out there that we don't have time to go into in detail now. But I would be really interested to hear what you have given thought to in terms of the ethics of what you spend money on. And so we have another quick question for you now in a Zoom poll, which Jamie's going to put up for us. So this is multiple choice, and I just want you to just share with us what where has your church community thought about the ethics of your spending in different areas. So you can choose as many as are relevant. And if you've thought about other things that aren't on the list, then do add them into the chat, and that would be helpful to see too.
You haven't got a none of these, have you?
No, but you're welcome to put that in the chat. yeah. Don't want to feel there's no shame attached to this. It's just helpful to hear and to see what people are thinking of. I'm not surprised to see tea and coffee up there. I think it's a very public part of our ministry and hospitality, isn't it? And actually lots of churches have thought through the tea and coffee that they buy, but interesting to see what other people have been considering too. And do have a look in the chat. It's great to see, Sarah, you pay the living wage. That's really good to hear. And also food banks and like using your building and your resources to serve the community. That's great to see too. So thank you for sharing that with us. So for every spending decision that you make, it's worth asking who profits. And if it's a physical product you're buying, who or what might have been harmed in its production? And if you're choosing a new supplier or a service provider, how does that company behave? What impact does it have on the world? How does it treat its employees? And how transparent is its supply chain? And there are things that can help. So when looking to switch provider or buy something that your church needs, you could seek out a business based on its structure or ethos, for example, a social enterprise or a cooperative. And you can look for ethical standards and accreditation too. You can look for a business that pays the living wage or a company that's been awarded the fair tax mark. And you'll know that your money is having a positive impact. And there won't always be easy answers, you'll know this. Sometimes we have to hold things in tension. Do we buy something from a local company to support a small business and our local economy, or from a bigger multinational that might pay its employees a fairer wage? Do we seek out a fair trade product, even if the food miles and carbon impacts are higher than something grown locally? And if you are struggling financially as a church, then some ethical options may be out of reach, although they are not always the most expensive option. And I think green energy is a good example of that. So I think it's important to recognise the tensions that there might be, and these are not easy decisions sometimes to make, but it's important to have those conversations. A very practical way of taking action with your financial footprint and your church's spending might be to develop an ethical purchasing policy that reflects your concerns and values and helps guide anyone spending church money to think carefully about what they are buying. And you could have some criteria there to assess any new provider or company that you buy from. And there are churches out there doing great work on this, and we're starting to put some case studies on our website. So if you're looking for inspiration, or if you've got a brilliant policy yourself that you'd like to share, then that would be really good to hear. And finally, on spending, the best option for your financial footprint sometimes will be to not spend money, or not to buy something new, but to repurpose or reuse something you already have, to buy second hand, or to reduce what you consume. There's this vision of a circular economy, which is about getting rid of waste. So make sure that waste just isn't built into the system. So we keep things in use. We make sure that we're protecting the planet. And there are some really brilliant initiatives happening out there that churches can be involved with. And sometimes churches are leading the way on these. Things like repair cafes, where people bring along broken electrical equipment to be fixed. Bike maintenance projects where volunteers are trained up to fix bikes and make them available to people that need them. And of course, good old-fashioned charity shops and bring and buy sales. So it's good to have a think about whether your church can get involved in challenging that kind of throwaway fast fashion culture and help people value what they have. And your church, among your congregation, there are probably lots of skills there that could really help with that. So I think it's really important not to separate our spending decisions from our faith, from our theology, because the money that goes into the economy through the things that we buy, that needs to be part of our discipleship and our mission alongside our charitable giving, with the same level of scrutiny and thought and prayer given to our spending decisions as we would to the charities that we support. But is there another way of thinking about our financial footprint? If we think about our spending power and our spending choices as maybe our left foot, and that's all the money that's going into the economy through the products and services that we buy, what is our right foot doing? What about the money that's in our bank accounts, in savings and investments? That's money that's not being spent or given away, but it's not neutral, it's still doing something. So when we think about ethical financial decisions, we often go straight to thinking about what we buy. But really we need to start closer to home than that, and we need to start with our choice of bank. And why is that? It's not the first thing that springs to mind when we think about tackling poverty and shaping a fairer society, but who we bank with does have an impact on the world. Banks have an important role to play in the economy. They keep our money safe and they lend to individuals and to businesses. So let's go back to St Luke's and think about this example. So they have a bank account with one of the big high street banks, a bank that consistently scores poorly on ethical ratings because of its investments and the companies that it lends to. It's a bank that invests in fossil fuels. It's financing a new coal power plant in Bangladesh. It invests in arms and military suppliers. And it's not just about who it lends to, but also about its policies and its practices internally. So this bank has the worst gender pay gap of banks in the UK, and it has been fined in the past for helping clients avoid paying millions of pounds in tax. So there's a lot going on there that runs counter to the world that the congregation at St Luke's would like to see. So what do you know about the bank that your church has an account with? What do you know about its values and its practices? Who does it lend to? And there are lots of ethical issues to explore. So what could St Luke's do? What can we do when we want to think about choosing an ethical bank? There are a few tools and resources that I want to flag up to you. Firstly, Ethical Consumer is a great resource. Some of you may know it. There's a range of guides and scorecards that they research and they put on. Some of it's available online, some of it you need to pay a small subscription for annually. They have guides to current accounts and to savings accounts. And we're aware that churches need particular functions and services from banks. And so we've done some research on this, and we've got what we call an action starter, which gives an analysis of the 5 most ethical bank accounts for churches and charities. And you can get that from our website. The Switch It campaign is a very handy tool. You simply go onto their website, you can put your bank in there, and it will tell you your bank's track record on fossil fuel investments and give you some examples of ethical alternatives. It's worth just noting that building societies and credit unions are often great options because they're accountable to customers and members, not to shareholders, and they don't lend in the same way to big multinationals. So it's worth checking out what's available to you locally. So St Luke's decided to switch their bank account to a more ethical option. They now know that their money is being invested in companies that have a positive impact on the world. They decided to write to their current bank to let them know why they are leaving, and they've explained in their church newsletter why they made the switch, in the hope that others might consider ethical banking too. So the last part of St Luke's financial footprint we're going to look at is its savings and investments. And this will obviously vary a lot depending on your church context. But what I say here applies to any savings or investments you have, small or large. You may not think of yourselves as an investor, but if you have a savings account, then some of the ethical issues that surround your current account and your choice of bank still apply. So St Luke's does have a modest amount of savings invested in a fund that gives them a small return. They've been trying to find out what their money is invested in. They are in a fund that tracks the FTSE 100, so that includes the largest companies incorporated in the UK. Those companies, the behaviour of those companies affects millions of people in Britain around the world. So what did St Luke's find out? They discovered that their money might be invested in companies like British American Tobacco, HSBC, Shell, BAE Systems, Rio Tinto, which is a multinational mining company. What kind of a world are these companies shaping? There are lots of ways in which St Luke's could be using its savings and investments to have much more positive impact on the world than simply being in a fund that tracks the FTSE 100 and not really knowing exactly what their money is invested in. So they could look for a fund that screens out particular sectors and industries. And this is what has traditionally been understood by the term ethical investing. So in other words, as long as you screen out companies from so-called bad industries like tobacco, alcohol, pornography, gambling or weapons, then you're considered to have an ethical portfolio. But is that good enough, just that screening out? What about if you want to go a step further than that and be really sure that your money is being used for good? That's where you might want to explore something called impact investing. This screens in investments based on companies or projects who are doing good in ways that we can actually measure. And there are lots of really good examples around this that you might want to explore. Lots of really exciting things happening in this area. And you can start very small, sometimes just with £5 or £50. And we're going to send round or put up on the website, I think, these slides later. So if you don't catch some of these things, don't worry. There's lots of information here. Ethics is a UK not-for-profit social impact savings investment platform. They've got some brilliant opportunities to invest in renewable energy, in sustainable transport, affordable housing and much more. Energize Africa is a collaboration between Ethics and a Dutch crowdfunding platform called Lend a Hand. And through that platform, you can invest in home solar energy across Africa and small companies that are providing home solar energy. And you can invest as little as £50 with them. You might have heard of Green Pastures. They are a Christian social enterprise. They buy or build housing to help local churches respond to homelessness. And you can invest in them as individuals or as a church. Shared interest is another option you might have heard of. You can open a shared interest share account with as little as £100. And those funds are used to provide finance to fair trade farmers and craftspeople around the world. And finally, the Big Exchange is very new. It was launched earlier this year, and it's a collaboration of a number of organisations, including the Big Issue Foundation. And you can invest funds in them that are measured against the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So if this is something that you want to look at, then obviously you need to do a bit of your own research, but it is quite easy to get started. If you have significant amounts of money to invest, then you're going to want to talk to a financial advisor. And it helps if you can find someone who understands your values as a church and can help you identify funds or platforms that match up with that. So I mentioned here UCSIF, which is the UK Sustainable Investment and Finance Association, and they have a directory of financial advisors who have experience of ethical investing. So that's a good place to start. And more churches are wanting to move their money away from fossil fuels. So if you are looking at if you've got investments already and you're looking to do that, then do get in touch with Operation Noah. They're an organisation, they want to hear from churches that are making a commitment to divest from fossil fuels, and they've got lots of resources to support you around that. Back in May this year, 42 faith institutions announced their divestment from fossil fuels. That's moving over £1 billion away from fossil fuels. And a similar announcement will be made next month, so look out for that. So there's lots of, I think, shoots of hope happening in this area. A lot of what we've talked about today has focused on what we do with our money, but there's another dimension to our financial footprint, which is about how we speak out and campaign. So if I can stretch the footprint imagery a bit further, it's about how we stand in solidarity with communities that are harmed by the actions of big multinationals, and how we walk alongside those who are working for change. And this is really important because if we take the example of St Luke's, they are taking great care to steward their resources in ways that shape the world for the better. And they're modelling a different way of making financial decisions. But there are bigger structural issues that will not be solved by simply changing their spending habits or moving their money. So there are lots of ways for churches to speak out and campaign, and I can only touch on a few here, but here are some things that you might want to explore. Firstly, to just listen and learn, find out about the issues affecting communities that you have a connection with, perhaps in another part of the world. How does the behaviour of big business or the things that banks are financing affect them? Or look closer to home. How are people in your local community affected by low wages or poor working conditions? You can work with others for change and get active politically, engage your MP, get involved in community organising. And lastly, you can hold businesses to account. You can celebrate positive steps where you see them. You can engage with them. You can keep up the pressure. And you can do that in lots of different ways. You can do that through shareholder action. You can do it through writing to companies. And that's really powerful if you do that as a church. You can speak to local managers and stores and build up a relationship with them. And if you have members of your congregation who are employees in different companies, they might be able to raise issues internally. So all of these things we've mentioned tonight will make a difference, and they'll make more of a difference if more churches get involved. So imagine if, as I think Jamie said at the beginning, every church switched to an ethical bank, supported businesses that are doing good, and used their finances in the practice of justice for the good of all. So if this has challenged or encouraged you to think about your church's financial footprint, then the good news is that we've got lots of resources to help you have these conversations in your churches, or to take things a bit further if this is something that you're already engaged with and passionate about. And one thing I want to talk to you just quickly about is a new resource we have called the Pledge. So the Pledge is a simple framework that we've developed to help churches examine where they're connecting their faith and their finances and where they could be taking action. There are 4 action areas, and we've looked at some of this today. So the first action area is where your treasure is. And that's around banking, saving, investments, and giving. Learning and sharing is about how we involve the whole congregation and the wider community in conversations about money, how we embed teaching about ethical issues around money into our teaching, our preaching, our prayer, our worship. Spending power, that's fairly obvious. That's about the kind of ethical purchasing stuff that I've mentioned, about what we buy. And speaking out is that bit around campaigning and advocacy. And for each action area, we've got tips and suggested things that you might want to do, and a list of questions for you to look through to identify what maybe you're already involved in and reflect on what you might like to do next. So we hope that through using the pledge resources, churches will identify some actions they want to take, and you can record that on our website, and then we'll know that that's what you want to do. That's great, and we'll be able to share that with others and also to support you in taking action. And excitingly, we're partnering with Ethical Consumer to raise awareness of the pledge, and they are offering a free annual subscription to the first 5 churches that record their pledge, and then some subsidised subscriptions to any church that gets involved. So again, I hope that might be a useful resource for you. I'm going to hand back to Janie now, who's going to say a little bit more about how you can get your church involved.
Great, thanks, Rosie. So how else can you get involved in the Money Makes Change programme and start a conversation in your church about these issues? A great place to start is to explore the resources on our website. This is just a screenshot of our website, and just gives you a bit of a snapshot of some of the resources available. As well as the resources Rosie's already mentioned, we have other resources you can explore, like Messy Money, a guided prayer resource, and lots more coming soon. A number of the resources are suitable for individuals, but can also be used as a church body to help explore this topic further. The Money Makes Change pledge, which Rosie mentioned, is our key tool for churches to really help them to take action in this space. But perhaps before a church is ready to take action, conversations need to take place, and that is also where we're always ready to help. We're always very happy to provide speakers for online services, or perhaps you'd like us to facilitate a workshop for your church. We're also happy to provide articles for church newsletters or websites, and we're starting to develop a bank of these on our website, which you're welcome to use. Perhaps you'd also like to find out more by joining our next online interactive small group workshop, which we're running over 3 weeks in November. We'll be hosting both a morning and evening group, and we'll be exploring some of these topics in a lot more detail. We'll be thinking and exploring what shapes our thinking and behaviour around money, why our financial decisions matter. We'll be looking at investing in ways in which we can use our money for good and not harm. And finally, how we can speak out and build a better world through our spending choices. All the details are on the events page on our website, and you can sign up on Eventbrite. We also have one final Restoring Hope event tomorrow, where you're welcome to join the ECCR team over lunch. Bring your sandwiches for an informal time of Q&A, discuss ways we could best support you, and find out what the programme has in store over the next few months. A great way to also stay in touch with us is via our e-newsletter, which we send out monthly. It's a great way to be informed about new resources, events we have coming up, and exciting developments in the world of faith and finance. Please do also connect with us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Finally, before we have some time, we've got about 10 minutes for questions and answers. Before we do that, we just want to let you know that ECCR is a charity entirely reliant on donations. All of our Money Makes Change resources are free for individuals and churches to use, and our Restoring Hope series of online events has also been put on free of charge. And so we really hope you've been inspired, blessed, or challenged by what you've heard tonight. Perhaps you might even consider contributing towards the cost of putting on these events or creating these resources. And a small donation from every participant will really go a long way and help a charity like us tremendously. If you'd like to give, there's a number of really easy ways to do this. We're providing a link to the website in the chat box, as well as a link to Donor Box, which you can also see on the screen there. Donor Box is the way to make a donation via debit or credit card. There's options to donate £5, £10 or £20 or any amount that you like to, and you can also mark your donation as eligible for gift aid. Or if you want to, you can text ECCR followed by the amount you'd like to give to the number on the screen. So for example, if you text ECCR 5, you'll be donating £5. Or if you text ECCR 3, you'll be donating £3, for example. And of course, if you'd like to consider making a regular monthly contribution to our work, we'd also love to hear from you. I'd be happy to provide you with more detail.
So we'll close just with a short prayer, which I'll read, but obviously feel free to join in at home. And then what we'll do is we'll just hold a bit of silence at the end. We found that helpful at sessions before because there's been a lot of talking, a lot of thinking. So if you want to just stay for a few moments of silence, we'll leave the meeting open. But obviously, if you need to get away, then do. And after a few minutes, we'll close the meeting. Creator God, guide us to be wise, just and generous stewards of the resources entrusted to us, so that together we may help shape a fairer world for all. Amen.